The South African job market is one of the biggest casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic. The National Treasury forecasting that the impact of the virus and resulting lockdown period could lead to job losses of up to 1.79 million, while the National Income Dynamics Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, which looks at the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic and the countrywide lockdown, found that approximately 3 million people lost their jobs over the lockdown period. How bad is the situation, and what does the future look like for the country in the next 12 months? Economist Xhanti Payi joins us now to unpack this. Xhanti, good evening, and thank you for your time. One could say COVID is not over. This is half-time, so we're almost counting those unemployment figures as they come or as it hits. Stats say putting them at 1.5 million currently. After your analysis, what would be the true picture?
Look, I mean, I think, good evening, Tabo. I think it's quite important, of course, really to not equate, the lowering of the levels of, the lockdown to actually sort of, the open freedom and all of us, doing as we please and actually pretending as if things are going back to normal. I appreciate the study that you reflect on, and I think it tells us something quite important, because actually, apart from people losing their jobs, it said 1 in 3 people had actually not earned an income. People who earned an income in February did not earn an income in April. Then we also saw another statistic that came from BankServe. Now, these are the people who do the clearing in our banks, and they were telling us that about 21% of salaries that are usually cleared in our banking system were not cleared in June. So basically, if you look at both those studies, and it tells us this thing is quite dire, because if you can think about one in every 5 people were not able to actually get a salary. So between, I think, the two studies, the one tells us if you are formally employed and you are getting money in your bank account, a fifth of those people did not get that money. And that tells us the people that were already employed, those are not the people who were not employed before. Yeah. But then it also tells us that, the people who were earning an income, that would include, of course, people who were in the informal sector. Even those people are not actually making money. So I think that's a very, very dire situation that we're facing, because, of course, we understand the informal sector is a very important part of the South African economy, and certainly how people actually make a living. So we are actually faced with a very serious situation, because as people lose jobs in the formal sector, we also know that people who are in the informal sector are also starting to lose their income.
We're going to talk about that. That's a very important part of what we need to talk about. Generally, follow your timeline. You are a forward-looking, positive person, but there is one tweet that I saw on your timeline that got me a little worried. And I said, if Xhanti is thinking like this, we are really in trouble. After a conversation with an economist friend of yours, you wrote, there is no economic recovery on the horizon. Banks are changing the way they do business. People will actually not recover those jobs.
I think it's a very important thing to realize. Actually, even just yesterday, I went to see a client in Sandton, and many offices are closed. People are working from work. That tells us something important about how actually our world has changed. Many of us will never go back to work. You and I may never actually have this interview face to face, because actually, if this is working out well, why should we ever? And so, if you realize that part where this friend of mine in banking is saying, look, all the offices that they've kept, the big, regional offices and local ones, they're saying, look, we have a big office in Sandton. We don't need that much space anymore, because clearly most of our people will not have to come back. Actually, they've capacitated people with power sources from home, in terms of which they can work in terms of load shedding. They've got security systems that are set up at home so that in their laptops, so that they're not worried about security being compromised if you're outside the main server. So that tells us that all those jobs, from cleaners to facility managers and all the people who work as security guards, who have been minding our big obsession with the big offices. I mean, both of us know, if you drive into Sandton, you know that there has been a lot of building and construction that's been happening there, creating lots of jobs for all sorts of kinds of people. Those people who have canteens, those people are not going to be necessary. And I think that's an important thing. So we are not going back. So when people say, well, the economy is opening, it is not as if it's going to open to the old way of being. It's opening now, but it is going to be about a new livelihood, a new life. And we have to actually find ways of saying, as we open now, we're not opening because we think we are recovering from the old from the disruption, but to a new way of being. And how do we actually do that? And I think government has to think now, and also other partners, business, about how this new paradigm is actually, how do we support then people, and how do we support the new way of life, a new way of work, because the future of work is very different to what we thought it was before this. So that is really the point, that actually, as we are excited about an opening economy, it is not opening so that people come back to work. There are people who will not ever come back to work in the jobs that they knew.
Now, the informal sector, comprising 20% of South Africa's total unemployment, this is a workforce with no security and no social protection at all. And COVID-19 exposed this to us in a real way. How do we recognize the informal economy's contribution and extend protection measures to this sector?
Look, I think it's a very, very important thing. And I want to first admit that I was one of those people who said, leave the informal sector alone. Why do you want them to register? Why do you want to constrain them with your bureaucracy? But I think we did not see this thing coming. And so I think that's one thing that tells us that we've got to now recognize that things have changed dramatically. What we knew, we no longer know, and we're actually quite exposed. So, and I think the main thing, though, is to say, if people have actually, if we have seen this kind of shift in the work environment, in the strategy in a structure for our economy, how do we actually support everyone? And then once somebody becomes a worker, once somebody becomes a contributor to the economy, how then are they safeguarded? We've always been happy to talk about issues of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. But I think we have not actually been very serious about how actually we make sure that we create, not just to say everybody must be an entrepreneur, but once we say somebody as a society, somebody is an entrepreneur, they are contributing, they're paying taxes, how do we make sure that they're actually protected? Now, one of those things is really actually going to be about how serious we take the new economy. Let me give you an example. I think, there was a time when, if you think about an insurance company, you had some retrenchment insurance, but I don't think they could have imagined the kinds of retrenchment you'd see. They've got life insurance. Nobody would have seen the kinds of death that we've seen in such a short time. But now everybody has to come to the table and say, how do we extend new products, new ways of protections, insurance, savings? The kinds of savings that we're going to be making now is going to look slightly different, because we are going to be a little bit more careful. We're going to think a little bit more. Some people will work 2 or 3 jobs now rather than one. So savings will look different. Your retirement will look different. So I think it is all those things that say, every single person now must be catered for. And I think there is also an opportunity in terms of how we think about business, how we think about insurance, how we think about savings, how we think about work, especially that let's take this opportunity to say, look, there are new opportunities that were not there before. There are new considerations we had not thought about. And that's where we actually see opportunities in terms of employment, work, and certainly growth.
Economist and founding director of NASSEN's Advisory and Research, Xhanti Payi, we thank you for your time tonight.